Americanized, Chapter 2, bottom of page 30. I knew better than to give her a lecture. Besides, her friends had assured her that they checked driver's licenses only when you crossed into Mexico. How could girls with perfect hair and a closet full of stylish flannels from Hot Topic be wrong about anything? Clearly, they know how Border Patrol operated. They were the original Girl Squad. There was no way they'd let one of their own get deported. But during the few days my parents thought that my sister was safely within our country's borders in San Diego, I was terrified for her. How would I be able to look my parents in the eye if something happened? It was like being stuck between a rock and Ryan Gosling's chiseled abs. If I took the responsible route and told my parents the truth, my sister would never speak to me again, and I'd never get to party with her in college. There was too much on the line. I had way too much to lose. If I had to live out in the rest of my years sending letters to a Mexican prison, I could handle it. My parents would never have to know that I aided and abetted her bad behavior. After all, wasn't that a younger sibling's primary reason for living? I was the Solange to her Beyonce, the Serena to her Venus, the Pippa to her Kate. I was not the Fredo to her Michael Corleone. But just because Fredo was older, not just because Fredo was older, but because he betrayed Michael, and Michael had killed him. My sister did make it back across the border, and my parents were none the wiser, and I'd finally proven myself to be a trusted servant. But if the secret Mexico trip was the defining test of my loyalty, I really earned my stripes when my sister and her best friend turned me into a legitimate stalker. I'll call my sister's friend Claudia to protect her identity. Claudia had a longtime crush on a guy named Connor, pining for him through most of high school and at the start of college. After a series of flirtatious phone calls, it seemed like Claudia and Connor's time had finally arrived. They'd both returned home for Thanksgiving with the understanding that their love would be consummated, or that they would make out and hold hands. But Connor was suddenly acting weird. He wouldn't return Claudia's calls and wouldn't commit to any of the plans they'd made leading up to the visit. It didn't matter that it was almost midnight when my sister and Claudia filled me in on the Connor affair. There was only one solution. We had to drive by his house on the other side of town and see what the guy was hiding. Keep in mind that this is before the internet was in every household, seriously, and we didn't have the luxury of cyber stalking. If you wanted to invade someone's privacy, you couldn't do it easily from the safety of your computer. You had to have enormous balls to track someone's every move, and I was about to grow a pair. Samira, of course, was the mastermind of the entire operation. The plan was as follows. We would drive by Connor's house, and if anything seemed fishy, we would park down by the block. I would get out of the car, make the long walk to this house, knock on his door, and recite everything my sister had directed me to say. You have to pretend to be really upset, Samira added as we turned down the street. When he slowly inched past his house, Claudia noticed an unidentified white Jetta in the driveway, a car that could be driven by only a female. And that was our cue. We had no choice. We had to carry out the plan. They parked down the street and wished me luck, and I quietly slipped out of the car. Be brave, I told myself as I made the agonizingly long walk in the pitch black to his driveway. I could do this. I could be a badass. I was little Sammy. If I could lie to the American government, then I could calm my way through a conversation with some shady college kid. There was only one problem. Connor wasn't just some college kid. After years of studying my sister's yearbooks, I knew him from afar. I knew he was a ravishing ginger with perfect dimples and an irresistible smile. Even though he'd graduated from Lynbrook before I enrolled, he was the kind of guy who was still talked about in hallways. Once I arrived at the front door, I took a deep breath and knocked. The door swung open and Connor stood in the entryway with his bare chest on display. He smiled at me. I tried to resist his charms and not smile back. For a brief moment, I imagined telling him this was a setup and I'd been forced by my mentally unstable sister and her clingy friends to harass him. He'd invite me in for a hot cocoa, praise me for my honesty, and then we'd fall in love and run away together. Claudia would eventually understand, but I didn't do that. Hi, I said shyly. I live down the street and my dog got loose and I can't find him. I was wondering if maybe you heard anything. Connor gave me a sympathetic shrug and said he hadn't. He asked what kind of dog I owned, and the first breed that came to mind was a Chihuahua. I could tell I'd given a convincing performance by the way he assured me that he'd keep his eyes peeled for my scared, lost fake dog. Just as I turned to leave, I heard a girl's voice from inside asking him who was at the door. I did not give in to my sudden urge to kick him in the nuts, call him a jerk, and berate him for lying to sweet Claudia with the perfect tan and ridiculously long legs. Instead, I made my way down his front steps. The walk back to the car was even more excruciating than the walk to Connor's door. Nowhere in the little sister job requirements did it say that I have to break the heart of one of the VIP members of the Girl Squad. I slid into the back seat and announced, He didn't have his shirt on, and I heard a girl's voice inside the house. I was only 15, but even I knew what this meant. They were totally boning. Claudia didn't cry when I confirmed her worst fear, but I could tell from the shaky tone of her voice that she was wounded. My sister consoled her all the way home, and we agreed that Connor was a pasty dick. We also agreed that I was the coolest little sister for going through the plan in the first place. But despite their praise, I was never as brave as Samira, and I'm still not. I didn't like to break the rules. I would have never gone to Mexico when I was undocumented. I wasn't as good at speaking my mind as she was, or as quick at my feet in a crisis. Samira Sadie was tough. She was zero F's before there was a meme. If I had been my sister at Connor's door, she'd have pushed herself into the house and told the girl who was sitting inside that he was a two-timer. She was my hero, and that night, a tiny bit of her power and glory rubbed off on me. I hated that in a couple of days she'd be going back to college, and I'd be getting ready for school Monday morning without her. My mom had seen into the future, and she was right. We were best friends. It felt as though we couldn't live without each other, and that was why a few months prior I'd sobbed during her high school graduation, flung myself onto the stage, grabbed hold of her legs, and screamed, "Never leave me!" while she accepted her diploma. Okay, that's maybe a slight exaggeration, but without her, I knew would no longer be little Sammy. I would no longer confidently stride through the senior parking lot. Instead, I'd be dropped off in the bus circle by my dad with the rest of the nerds. Even worse, I knew it was the end of an era. With my sister away at college, our family of five would never live under the same roof together again. The others upstairs bedroom would be empty. I didn't care if I would have the bathroom to myself because it would mean losing my better half. For most of my childhood, my sister brought me to hysterics from fights and days of silent treatment. Back when we shared a room, she was the one who'd divide up the floor with masking tape, building an invisible wall between us. But the day we dropped her off at UC Davis, she once again threw me into an emotional tailspin. I didn't want to go from being the middle child to the oldest in the house. I kept it together throughout the whole day. My smile didn't waver when we met her college roommate and helped her set up her dorm room. I managed to stay upbeat when we explored the town and ate lunch together as a family. But the moment we dropped her off for good, I turned into a complete puddle, and she cried too. Because that's what happens when you feel that connected to someone. They laugh, you cry, and they cry. More than 20 years later, my sister still has the same effect on me. She lives in Northern California with her family, and I live in Los Angeles with mine. But if it were up to me, we'd take a page from my mom and aunt's book and live next door to each other. Frequently asked question number one: what's the difference between being Persian and being Iranian? Essentially, there isn't much separating the two. I'll be using them interchangeably because when you're writing a book, it's nice to use different words to say the same thing. Technically speaking, Persian is an ethnicity while Iranian is a nationality. So you may be from Iran, but you could be Kurdish instead of Persian. But the country was also formally called Persia until the government changed the name to Iran in 1935. By 1959, scholars convinced the government that Persia and Iran should both be part of the vernacular. When people inquire about my ethnicity, I prefer to say I'm Iranian. It always feels like Persian is the more pretentious response, and a term to use when you don't want people to associate with a country that's been referred to as part of the axis of evil. But to anyone who still refers to Iran in those terms, I respectfully say, stop being a horrible xenophobe. Diary entry from December 3rd, 1994. It's like every time I walk by him, I have a tinge of hope that this could be it. He might talk to me or bump into me or whatever, but when nothing ever happens, when he walks by, he takes a little piece of my heart with him. Chapter 3: Sporting the Frida Kahlo. The comment left me adrift in a river of teen angst. Words escaped me. For once, I didn't have a cutting response at the ready. My face was on fire, my eyes filled with hot tears. I wanted to crawl under my wobbly desk at ninth grade English and stay hidden there forever. It wasn't the worst plan. Our high school was equipped with showers and a well-stocked cafeteria. I could remain tucked away on the floor of Mrs. Carter's classroom until the final bell rang, and when everyone left to go home, I could emerge from hiding to eat the leftover scraps in the commissary kitchen and shower in the girls' locker room. I'd let the warm water run over me as I cradled myself in the fetal position. I'd sleep on the cot in the nurse's office, and when morning rolled around, I'd find safe harbor beneath another desk so that I would never have to make eye contact with anyone again. I would miss my parents, but then again, they were the ones to blame for my predicament. You did this to me, I would scream if they tried to take me home. You're the reason I have to live the rest of my life like Quasimodo's busted little sister. Unless you make your living as a supermodel, you know what it's like to have at least one physical imperfection that makes you feel irreversibly ugly. That one feature you'd change in a heartbeat if you could. For me, it's always been my dominant nose. Why couldn't I have been the first Iranian in the history of the world born with a button nose? Why did my face have to confirm the most widespread stereotype about our people? But it wasn't my unfortunate nasal structure that nearly turned me into a hermit in the day I decided to build a home under my desk. It was a tiny patch of unwanted hair that had never even made it onto my 10 things I hate about myself list until Gideon White pointed it out. Gideon was my very first high school crush. The pages of my freshman year diary are littered with this name. My love for him vacillated from one entry to another. Some days I wanted to be with him forever. Other days I knew my feelings would never be reciprocated, and that was my civic feminist duty to get over him. I didn't know any of the other boys in our freshman class, and Gideon was the only guy I'd come across who not only was cute and charming, but also appreciated my dry humor. I fell for him by default. All right, we're going to stop there for today's reading section on the bottom of page 42.